All right. 2 days after an assassination attempt during a rally in Pennsylvania, former President Trump made his first appearance at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last night. Trump's right ear was visibly bandaged as he entered the convention hall. The crowd was cheering as the former president walked out during a live rendition of Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA. Meanwhile, new details are beginning to emerge in the assassination attempt investigation. According to senior officials, forensic technicians are working 24 hours a day at the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, analyzing the cell phone, laptop, computer and of shooter Thomas Matthew Crooks. They successfully gained access to his phone earlier in the day, but the search of his electronics have yet to reveal a motive. This, as we're learning, the FBI is now investigating the shooting as an act of domestic terrorism. Authorities found explosives in the car used by the gunman, and more than a dozen guns were found in a search of his family home. 3 officials say the shooter's father called police following the shooting of Trump to say that he was worried that both his son and his AR-15 were missing. The FBI is probing whether some ammunition was bought in the days before the shooting or whether it was delivered to the home.
You know, Willie, I just showing this shot right here. I mean, the overhead view of all of this is still, it doesn't, you know, the more times we see it, the more shocking it is that they actually had a building where there was a straight line between the shooter and the former president. So many things about this is so shocking, and you know,
kill shot.
Yeah, it was just directly ahead of it, and then you look at what happened after the shooting, how long it took them to get him covered up and protected. There are, you know, as we get further away from this, there are more and more questions about what the Secret Service was doing, not just you know, pertaining to protecting the perimeter, but also protecting the former president after the first shots rang out.
Yeah, it's the question we've been asking since the immediate moments afterward. If you look at that layout in the map we just had up there, how just over a football field away from an elevated position could a 20-year-old man climb to the roof and just get a clean, open shot on the former president of the United States? It is a stunning failure. We're going to talk in some detail here about that in just a moment. But this is only by the grace of turning his head, thank goodness, is Donald Trump still alive, for the sake of his own sake, of his family, of the country, that he's still here because he turned his head. That was an open shot. And by the way, we're getting some new information here at NBC News. 4 officials telling us rally goers alerted local police to a suspicious person near a section of the rally prior to the gunshots ringing out. Lines up with a lot of the videos we've been seeing. Local police searched for the man on foot, but were unable to find him until he was spotted on the roof of that nearby building a short time later. During the pursuit, local police told the Secret Service they were looking for a suspicious person. However, it was not clear what time the Secret Service was notified and if it was before Trump took the stage. There are some videos out there. The New York Times has one on their website right now of people, while Donald Trump was speaking in the minutes before he was shot, pointing up to that rooftop and saying there's somebody up there with a gun. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has more now on the investigation.
Take a look at what happened.
Though stunning and unexpected, authorities had already considered the gunman's rooftop perch a worry. Witnesses say they spotted a threat that day.
We're like, hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle.
But the Secret Service had actually identified the building near the Trump rally as a potential vulnerability in the days before the event, according to 2 sources familiar with the agency's operations. But officials say no officers had been posted there. A key question is why. At the White House, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas said he expects within days to choose the head of an independent review from outside the administration.
I am committed to going externally of the department and externally of the government so that no question of its independence can be raised.
Secret Service officials say they had designated that local law enforcement would secure that building.
Any type of missteps that were made or miscommunication that was made, it has to be addressed.
A major shift affecting independent candidate Robert Kennedy, who has been repeatedly denied government security.
The president has directed me to work with the Secret Service to provide protection to Robert Kennedy Jr.
Kelly O'Donnell reporting there. Let's bring in NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, NBC News law enforcement analyst Evie Poumpouras. She has experience serving in the Secret Service's Presidential Protective Division, and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuade. Good morning to you all. Tom and Evie, you and I were on the air together Sunday morning in the hours after this took place. Tom, I'll start with you. A question that doesn't feel like it has a lot more answers than it did 48 hours ago, which is, what more do we know about the shooter and a potential motive?
Last time I saw you, I was hopeful that between the cell phone that they were able to recover, that they would be able to get into that. It is our lives. It doesn't tell a lie. You know, your web search history is your web search history. Your apps are your apps, and your messages are your messages. And I was hopeful that perhaps off of that, they would be able to determine not just the how. I think that's becoming into a more focus. You laid out some of the reasons, the purchases of ammo. Last night we reported that a Home Depot receipt was found on him, a purchase of a ladder. They're trying to determine whether that ladder that was purchased leading up to this shooting was the one that he used to get on the roof. So those type of details are coming through and are becoming more clear. But the why, and I know, and I get it because I get the vitriol online, somebody shot at Donald Trump. What other reason could it be than some sort of a political reason? That's what people are saying. And I think it's important to remember, first off, the last presidential shooting we had, John Hinckley Jr. did it to impress a Hollywood actress. We've seen a number of incidents happen over the years where people thought the motive was clear, and it turned out to be a complete 180 based on the evidence, and that's where the FBI needs to go with it. Then we found out yesterday that they had a preliminary review of the cell phone. The investigation is still ongoing, obviously, and there was really nothing on that led them to the why. And I think that's a real challenge. And going forward here in this investigation, they're talking to the family. Every indication so far is that the family has been cooperative, but they're kind of running out of leads at this point. And so I think they're either hoping that somebody comes forward or that they find some other piece of evidence or a needle within needles in a haystack to try to figure out why this happened. I will caution people that it is possible that we might never know why this individual got on the roof that day. And I would also caution people think, well, it's anti-Donald Trump because this person doesn't like them, because their views are on the other side of the political spectrum. It is possible that Donald Trump, and there's a bit of a theory in law enforcement, is it possible that Donald Trump was not conservative enough for this individual? It runs the gamut. And I think it's important in this situation. This is the way that we approach our reporting. Everything's on the table. Let's figure out what authorities have. Let's do our own work, talk to our own people. You saw some of that in Kelly's piece right there. And then from that point, we can start to piece together why this happened.
So, Joe, as we've been reporting the last couple of days, the shooter here, a registered Republican, but also someone who gave $15 when he was 17 years old to a progressive group that gets voter turnout for Democrats. So everyone's sort of able to ascribe their priors and their own theories to that, using those two truths.
I guess, yeah. I've just seen the video.
It's hard to.
It's hard.
I keep getting shocked by it.
It's shocking. We may not know the why for some time, but Tom, the question I have is how? How did the Secret Service allow someone to have a straight line of sight to a former president who may be the next president, that an AR-15 could reach, when the Secret Service and law enforcement obviously knows? An AR-15, as we've reported time and time again through the years, is the weapon of choice of disturbed young men, and it's within range there. Why weren't there sharpshooters on top of that building? Why were people yelling for almost 90 seconds? There's a shooter on top of the building. What the hell was going on there? Here's where they're yelling. There's a shooter up there. And 90 seconds. And Tom, I want to show you another video. And, you know, I would love to hear from you even too on this. Look how long. Look how long Donald Trump is exposed. What are these Secret Service people doing? Look how long he is exposed to a second, third, fourth shooter. Show that video again. A second, third, fourth shooter. I mean, the thing is, the Secret Service has always been trained. When you hear a shot, when you have a threat, get on top of the president, get on the top of the person that you were protecting, and stay there. Here, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
completely exposed.
8, 9. 9 seconds, I'm counting right there, Tom, before the edit. Who trained these people? How could anybody in a leadership position in the Secret Service still have a job this morning?
Well, I think there's probably a reason why they still have a job is that they have a job to do with respect to the RNC. I completely understand your point. I think looking last night at the video that we saw of Trump moving through the crowd at the RNC, it appeared to me to be a very different approach. The amount of Secret Service agents that were between Trump and the crowd at the RNC, there was no point where there appeared to be any sort of extended gap between kind of human to human and as far as the agents, you know, essentially elbow to elbow, and Donald Trump as he's moving to the position that he ultimately took. And this is inside a building where there is no outside exposure, where everybody had to go through a magnetometer that's a controlled space. So I think that kind of underscores obviously a change. With respect to all of your questions, they're all the exact questions that we have, Joe. You know, we hear so often about the ability of the Secret Service to jump in, to move somebody out of the scene, to get them in the car and get them on the way. I think there's a lot of questions as far as the timing of that. Back to the original component of it.
And Tom, I'm so glad you talked about the car, because not only did they give a second, third, fourth shooter that could very well have been there 9 seconds while he was up on the stage, where his head was actually higher than all of theirs. But then he did something that the Secret Service, that well-trained Secret Service members never do. They let him stand up and wave to the crowd from the car. Now, of course, every politician is going to want to do that, to say, I'm okay, I'm all right. But I always remember after 9/11, George W. Bush ordering the Secret Service to fly him back to Washington, D.C. And finally, Secret Service members saying, I'm sorry, Mr. President, this isn't your plane. This is our plane. Our job is to protect you first. We saw the same thing on January 6th when President Trump wanted to go up to the Capitol. The Secret Service said no. But here we have people around him that are exposing him for 9 seconds. And then he gets to the car and they let him stand up once again and expose his head, which again is what a politician would do. He stands up and waves back to the crowd there.
You could see his head the whole way.
But so I guess I should just ask you this. Have you ever seen that before? Have you ever seen a group of Secret Service people so fail the person they were supposed to protect?
Well, I think one of the natural answer to that is we've so rarely seen this. And so the question might be, is the Secret Service being adequately trained? So if you're a police officer, you're dealing with calls every single day. If you're an FBI
Tom,
agent...
Isn't this what they train for their entire life? If you're going to protect the President of the United States.
But there's a difference. There's a difference between...
Isn't this what they're trained to do their entire life?
Sure. I mean, look, there's a difference between when you're doing it in a training exercise and there's a difference when it's real life. And so I think there's going to be a lot of questions about whether or not the Secret Service is in a position. I know there are people inside the tactical community that believe should people be rotated in and out of the Secret Service, people that deal with tactical situations more often. And so should that be something where you're not just in the Secret Service, but you're getting more real world type of experience? I think of in New York City, if this incident happened in New York City, you would not only have, I would posit that this incident would not happen in New York City, but of course the resources available in Butler County, Pennsylvania are different than the NYPD's. But the people that would be doing this with the Secret Service from the NYPD are kicking in doors every single day on crimes. They're in high-risk situations all the time. And so is this a question where the Secret Service, the people that are doing this type of work, do they need to be cycled in and out of other different types of environments so there's more real-world training? I mean, the last time they actually, real-world experience, the last time they really had to deal with this was the Reagan shooting. Now, I know that people in the Secret Service are going to say, look, you have no idea the type of training that we do. We go through all these type of scenarios. We drill on it all the time, and I have no doubt about it. I think to go back to some of the original videos that you were showing there, in a little bit more of my expertise and a little bit more of my reporting, with respect to what happened on the roof, it is our reporting from 4 officials, and my colleagues Jonathan Dienst and Julia Ainsley, that, in fact, they were aware of this person. He was acting suspiciously around the magnetometers. He was acting suspiciously around the crowd. The crowd picked him out. There was a communication back to the command post. What happened there? The Secret Service has its own radio system, its own radio frequencies. It's encrypted. There's all sorts of good reasons for that. But what was the communication between local law enforcement and the Secret Service? And was the threat acted upon quickly enough? Were there also police assets that were there that they thought maybe this individual was part of the police? Or should there have been a much stronger uniformed police presence? And was it upon the Secret Service to say, hey, this area is a vulnerability. We don't have the agents to cover it. That's not necessarily our job. But we want a uniformed officer that can see another uniformed officer at every single time, and nobody gets on that property and nobody gets on that roof. Again, all questions that we're asking, all questions that'll need to be answered.
It's hard to look at.
But when you do look at that map, as you pointed out at the beginning of the program, it does raise serious questions, and I think that's the reason why the Secret Service is under the microscope. Okay.
Sick societies don't produce young men like Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, who placed his body between mine and the man with the gun simply because he felt that's what his duty called for him to do. Sick societies don't produce dedicated police officers like Tom Delahanty. Sick societies don't make people like us so proud to be Americans and so very proud of our fellow citizens.
Then President Ronald Reagan, less than a month after he was shot and nearly killed by a gunman in Washington, D.C. GOP nominee Donald Trump has signaled he will call for unity ahead of his speech at the RNC on Thursday after surviving his own assassination attempt over the weekend. More than a century earlier, then former President Teddy Roosevelt, who was shot while campaigning to retake the White House, cooled down his rhetoric in a hard-fought campaign after the attempt on his life. So too did Alabama Governor George Wallace, who survived being shot 5 times in 1972 when he was running for president, and would go on to apologize for his long history of racism.
Let's bring in right now Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. Doris, there's so many things we need to talk about. I want to start though with TR because you looked at what happened with Donald Trump, who got shot, and then despite the fact the Secret Service should have held his head down and got him off stage, he still stood up and made the gestures to the crowd, told me it was okay, raised his fist. It does remind you of TR getting shot and continuing his speech.
You're absolutely right, Joe. It does. I mean, what happened to TR was he was shot standing up in a car right outside the hotel on his way to deliver a speech, right in the chest, point blank. He was shot, and they insisted, the doctors, that he go to the hospital. He said, no, I'm going to give the speech. So he goes to give the speech. He stands on that stage with the bullet in his chest. 64 minutes. He's 84 minutes he speaks in that speech. They come up to the stage several times. You've got to get off. Your breath is going. He said, no, I have to finish. He finally finished his speech. And the thing they realized was they only realized he hadn't been killed because he had his speech was so thick, it was in his pocket, and his spectacles were there, that it didn't deflect into his heart. Incredibly, right? So he goes to the hospital. He has to stay there for some time to the infection. But when he comes out, he does change. I mean, he does, as you say, he got rid of the invective that he'd been using. He'd been name-calling. He gave one of the best speeches, and it looked like the empathy of the country was going to go for him. In fact, one of the Democrats said the bullet that rests in Teddy Roosevelt's chest has now killed Wilson, the Democrats' chance for the election. But in fact, the fundamentals remain the same. He was a former president running against Taft, his former friend, in the Republican Party. The Republican Party was split, so the Democrats won, but he won the largest ever third-party candidate because he was able to deal with that election and that assassination attempt in the most perfect tonal way.
Well, every biographer of Republican Ronald Reagan seemed to also talk about how he changed after he got shot. And Reagan, who was considered to be the coldest of Cold War warriors, Reagan believed that God had a hand in his life being saved. And didn't he talk about from that point forward, his goal was to bring about an end of a nuclear escalation and to prevent Armageddon?
I think you're right, Joe. When you come up against your mortality, as certainly Reagan did, it makes you reflect and think about, how do I want to be remembered? What do I want to do with the rest of my term? I mean, even in that month when he went to the joint session of Congress from that speech, that was the perfect tone, right, for him to believe in the optimism of America, to talk about this is not a sick society. How can it be when all these people have done such heroic things? And then what he did was to introduce his legislative package, his tax bill, which had not been going very well before the assassination attempt. But now there was such an overwhelming approval for him. It went up to 68% after that assassination attack, higher than it would ever go. And he was able to get that bill through the Congress. So he was able to move forward, which I think is what the country wanted. And then, as you say, later on, move forward much more on his international beliefs.
We've talked about positive outcomes from these tragic events. Let's talk about also negative outcomes. I still am a very strong belief, and you obviously you lived this too close and too personally, but it was a very strong belief that America never recovered from what happened on November 22nd, 1963. You talk about two Americas. That is a dividing line unlike hardly in others. And I don't know that the Democratic Party ever really recovered from June 6, 1968, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. What are your thoughts?
Well, what you realize in the 1960s, where I've just been living again in my mind in terms of my new book, you were numbed almost. You had John Kennedy's assassination. You had Martin Luther King's assassination. You had Bobby Kennedy's assassination, Malcolm X. It was a period of time when so much was following upon each other. But I do think we did recover in one sense. I mean, Lyndon Johnson went to a joint session of Congress only 4 days after the funeral, and he said, let us move forward. And he armored himself in all the admiration that was there for John Kennedy. He said nothing would matter more than the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And indeed, his entire legislative program, JFK's legislative program, was stuck in the Congress. People were talking about a broken Congress in gridlock. And he got almost all of those bills through. And it made people feel we were moving forward. At the same time, when you think about Wallace, as you mentioned at the beginning, there was a change for the positive. He had been the arch segregationist. He got shot in the stomach in 1972 campaigning for the presidency. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Again, he came up against his mortality, had time to reflect, and he turned against his old self. He truly changed. He went before the black community. He took responsibility for all his segregation comments. He went to the black churches. He ran for governor again, and he won 90% of the black vote, and then had a good presidency, a good governorship for the black people. He put more people into his administration. He doubled the number of black registration votes. And somehow even John Lewis at the end was able, when he died, to put for Wallace's death, saying he had become a changed man. I may never forget what he did when he talked about segregation, but I forgive. That's what the civil rights movement is all about. It's about love and justice and forgiveness. So that's a positive thing. So certainly positive things came out of these if the tone is right and the people move forward. And that's what we saw Reagan do. That's what we saw JFK do. And that's what we saw George Wallace do as well. So we can take, I think, some solace and hope from that. Maybe the president will be a chump. Maybe the president will be a changed man. He's talked about the fact it changed him. We'll have to just wait and see what happens in these days and months ahead.
Presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, thank you very much. Her book, An Unfinished Love Story, A Personal History of the 1960s, is out now.
The House Oversight Committee plans to conduct an investigation into the security lapses at that event. The Republican-led committee has asked Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle to testify at a hearing next week. Joining us now, Republican Congressman Mike Lawler and Democratic Congressman Richie Torres, both of New York. They recently announced a plan to put forward bipartisan legislation that would enhance Secret Service protection for President Biden, former President Trump, and third-party candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. Gentlemen, good morning. It's good to have you with us this morning. Congressman Torres, I'll start with you here on the set. What exactly would your legislation do to change the way the president is protected, that Donald Trump is protected, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is protected?
So most Americans are profoundly shaken by the mass shooting that not only endangered the life of a president, former president, but also wounded 2 people and killed a volunteer firefighter. And for us, the attempted assassination of a former president is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It's an American issue. It's an American crisis that requires a unified response from Congress. And so in the spirit of bipartisanship, Congressman Lawler and I have introduced legislation that would enhance Secret Service protection for the president, the former president, and the presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy, because as far as we're concerned, there's no price tag too high when it comes to the protection of presidential candidates. You know, the United States is no stranger to violent extremism. In the 1960s, we saw the assassination of a president, a presidential candidate, several civil rights leaders, and we're so divided as a country that we cannot afford to return to a period of political assassinations in America.
Congressman Lawler, you and Congressman Torres have worked together on other bipartisan legislation as well. I think the question that we all have is the same one that you both are asking, which is how could this possibly happen when you have an asset, a protectee as important as the former president of the United States, the Republican nominee, now we can say officially as of last night? How was that rooftop left unguarded? How would this legislation, in your eyes, change that?
Well, Willie, but for the grace of God, we'd be having a very different conversation today. I mean, we're talking about a millimeter's difference between Donald Trump being dead and being here to receive the Republican nomination. It's unconscionable that this occurred. Obviously, a lot of questions are outstanding. We're going to have numerous House committee hearings on this. And I know the independent investigation will produce a lot of information. But it is critical that our elections are determined by votes at a ballot box and not by violence at a rally. And that this was allowed to occur really brings that into question, and it undermines our democracy, because to have a presidential candidate, to have a former president potentially assassinated is so destructive. And so what Richie and I are trying to do by getting this bill forward is to make it clear that the United States government, the federal government, the Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security have a responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of all of these candidates, including RFK Jr., whose family has been subjected to assassination twice. We cannot allow this to happen in America. As Richie pointed out, I mean, look, we're divided. We're going to air our differences. We should have robust debate on the issues. But violence should never, ever be the answer to our political differences, not now and not previously.
Congressman Torres, let's be clear, we don't know, investigators do not know the motive of the shooter. But as your colleague just noted, we live in very divided times, not just divided times, but times full of really incendiary political rhetoric. Give us your sense as to the problem across the country with that right now, and do you have any hopes that the temperature can actually be lowered in the wake of the shooting?
I can only hope, and I join President Biden in calling on all of us to lower the temperature. You know, I've long had concerns that the coarsening of American rhetoric and American discourse could eventually escalate into violence. But to your point, we do not know the motive of the shooter. We know that he was a registered Republican, but we do not know whether the act of violence was ideologically or politically motivated. And so we have to resist the temptation to politicize the events. And I find it troubling that a number of pundits are interpreting the event through the prism of their own politics in order to fit a politically preferred narrative. But the fact is, anything that is said about the mental state of the shooter is pure speculation.
So, Congressman Lawler, what about from your side? You're sitting at the Republican National Convention there in Milwaukee. We've heard calls even from former President Trump himself. We heard it from Speaker Johnson. I spoke to him the morning after the shooting. He called for calm and toning down the rhetoric. Obviously, there's been a lot of rhetoric coming from the former president over the years. It's happening all over the place. How do we get to a place where that actually happens and it's not just lip service?
Look, you see with Congressman Torres and I, number one, we can find areas of commonality and agreement. But number two, when we do have disagreement on an issue, you can do so civilly and engage with each other and find area of commonality and agreement. I think all of us, Republicans and Democrats, have a responsibility to advance the dialogue in a way that is not destructive to our country, that doesn't undermine our democracy, that doesn't put our presidential candidates' lives at stake. You know, look, Donald Trump took a bullet the other day. And like I said, but for a millimeter's difference, we'd be having a very different conversation. If that doesn't shock our conscience as a nation, I don't know what will. I think, you know, this election obviously is heated. It is divided. I think one thing I want to make clear, regardless of the outcome, our democracy will endure as it has for 248 years and will continue to because of the American people. Putting all personalities aside, at the end of the day, our differences are far smaller than what unites this country. And we always have to keep that in mind. Yes, politics can be coarse. It can be rough and tumble. But I think all of us have a responsibility to speak to the better angels of our nature, to quote a former president who was assassinated, and to really try to uplift this country, regardless of the outcome in November.
Amen to that. And let's just hope all the people calling for turning down the temperature and cooling of their rhetoric continue to live up to that in the days and weeks and years to come here. Republican Congressman Mike Lawler, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres, both of New York, thanks for your work on this and thanks for being here this morning.
President Joe Biden will be in Las Vegas today to announce new action to lower housing costs across the country. According to a fact sheet obtained by NBC News, the action will include calls for Congress to pass a law requiring landlords to cap rent increases at 5% or risk losing out on federal tax breaks.
With us now, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Biden, Marcia Fudge. Today, she's officially joining the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign as a national co-chair. Thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, the affordability of housing is one of the greatest challenges facing, I was going to say young Americans, but young and old Americans alike.
It absolutely is. And thank you for having me this morning. I'm happy to be a part of the team. Housing is a crisis in this country, and it has been for some time. I'm really excited about the fact that the president is announcing this in Las Vegas, where the crisis is particularly acute. Housing prices, especially rents, are going up 10, 20% annually, and it is making it such that we have more and more people who need assistance, more and more people being pushed to the streets. I think that the president is saying to this country, I hear you, I see the problem, I know the problem, and I'm going to do everything I can to solve the problem. And I'm really excited about what can happen when we try to make sure that every American has decent and safe housing and affordable housing. That's what today is about.
Secretary Fudge, good morning. You obviously have firsthand experience in this, and you've witnessed it from the inside as Secretary of HUD. What are the big challenges from the inside that you saw? You might have come in with an idea about how you were going to fix things. What are the challenges that face anyone looking for housing, expensive, less expensive, or otherwise in this country?
Well, there are only really two things that we can do. One is build more housing, because until we put more housing in the market is going to continue to drive the prices up. So there has to be more affordable housing. But secondly, as we're talking about Las Vegas again, 1 in 3 homes in various parts of Las Vegas are purchased by corporate buyers. Corporate buyers come in, they own almost 1/3 of the recently sold housing in places like Florida, Las Vegas, and other places. So they drive the prices up because they hold on to them. They don't sell them. They rent them. And they raise the rents on an annual basis. And it has created a real problem because we have no control over how that is happening. That is why the president is saying it's time for Congress to do something, to act, to make sure that people are not being gouged and that people can continue to expect to find something that they can live in that is affordable.
Madam Secretary, you, of course, used to represent the state of Ohio in Congress, also from Ohio. Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, someone you know. Give us your impressions of Trump's pick.
I would just say this. I'm not sure any of us know who J.D. Vance is. Just in my time knowing anything about him, he has reinvented himself at least 3 different times. The only thing I'm clear on is that he wants a national abortion ban with no exceptions, and that he believes that women should continue to live in abusive households. That's the only thing he's been consistent on that I'm aware of. Ohio, I think, would do well to continue to try to figure out who he is.
All right, national co-chair for the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge, thank you so much for being on this morning. Take care. And
hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.